On this episode of the Dr. Kumar Discovery, obesity affects over 40% of American adults. The medical establishment has tried everything, and nothing has really moved the needle at the population level. And this is why GLP-1 agonists are being seen as game changers. These drugs are achieving what was previously thought impossible: safe, significant, sustained weight loss. But as with anything that seems too good to be true, we need to look deeper, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Because the reality is, there's never a free lunch in this world. Everything has a cost. My name is Dr. Ravi Kumar. I'm a neurosurgeon in search of the causes of human illness and the solutions that help us heal and thrive. I want you to join me on a journey of discovery as I turn over every stone in search of the roots of disease and the mysteries of our resilience. The human body is a mysterious and miraculous machine with an amazing ability to self-heal. Let us question everything and discover our true potentials. Welcome to the Dr. Kumar Discovery. Welcome to the Dr. Kumar Discovery Podcast. My name is Dr. Ravi Kumar. I'm a board-certified neurosurgeon and assistant professor at UNC. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most talked about medications of our time, GLP-1 agonists. You know them as Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound. They're literally everywhere, from celebrity endorsements to being used by your friends and family. But most of us don't know much about them. We've just heard the hype and the biology and the chemistry and all the important things you should know about a drug are pretty much a mystery to the general public. So let's fix that. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the science behind GLP-1s, the fascinating history of their discovery, their benefits, and their very real downsides. We'll also talk about how they stack up against good old-fashioned lifestyle changes, and I'll give you a practical framework for thinking about whether these medications belong in your biology. So whether you're considering these drugs, or maybe you're already taking them, or you're just curious about the hype, stick around because this episode is going to be a gem. And before we dive in, I just want to take a quick moment for a disclaimer. I'm a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. This show and everything in this episode is for informational purposes only, and it's completely separate from my role as assistant professor at UNC. My goal with this podcast has always been simple. It's to give you knowledge because I genuinely believe that knowledge is power. And the more you understand about your own health, the more empowered you are to actually do something about it. So take what resonates, do your own research, and always loop in your healthcare provider before making any big changes. Okay, so let's start with the reality we're living in. Obesity affects over 40% of American adults and about 16% of adults worldwide. So that's roughly 890 million people who are obese in this world. It's a public health crisis driven by our food environment, sedentary lifestyles, and frankly, an economic system that makes unhealthy food cheap and convenient while healthy food is expensive and time-consuming. Traditional weight loss approaches have a dismal track record. Most people who lose weight through diet and exercise alone gain it back within 5 years. The medical establishment has tried everything from ineffective pills to risky surgeries, and nothing has really moved the needle at the population level. And this is why GLP-1 agonists are being seen as game changers. These drugs are achieving what was previously thought impossible: safe, significant, sustained weight loss. We're talking 15 to 22% body weight reduction in clinical trials. That kind of weight loss can be transformative. It's the difference between prediabetes and normal glucose tolerance, between sleep apnea and breathing freely at night, between joint pain and being able to walk without discomfort. But as with anything that seems too good to be true, we need to look deeper. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Because the reality is, there's never a free lunch in this world. Everything has a cost. So before we weigh the risks and benefits of GLP-1 drugs, I want to talk about their history because they're not actually new drugs, believe it or not. The story of GLP-1 begins in 1906 Liverpool, England. Two researchers discovered that an extract from the intestines could lower blood glucose. They called this mysterious factor incretin because it stimulated insulin secretion from inside the gut. But then shortly after that, insulin was finally isolated and used to treat diabetes by Frederick Banting in 1920s, and the incretin story went dark for decades. Everyone was focused on insulin at the time. It was the miracle peptide hormone that saved diabetics from certain death. Because if you had diabetes back then, you were almost certainly guaranteed to die. And that discovery of insulin by itself was actually a fascinating story. I did a whole podcast on it, and you should definitely go back and listen to it. But getting back to GLP-1s, incretin, which is the mother molecule of all GLP-1 drugs, was forgotten with the discovery of insulin. So we got to fast forward now to 1970s and early 1980s. The revolution in recombinant DNA technology gave scientists new tools to explore what genes were actually doing. And this is where our four main characters enter the story. First, there's Joel Habner, an endocrinologist and molecular biologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. In 1983, Habner was studying the glucagon gene using DNA from anglerfish. He cloned the glucagon gene and made it an astonishing discovery. Glucagon wasn't alone in its genetic neighborhood. Embedded in the same precursor protein were two other peptide sequences that nobody had seen before. At least he thought so. He called them glucagon-like peptides, GLP-1 and GLP-2. And these peptides just happened to be the same group of molecules, incretins, they had found in the intestines back in the early 1900s. And this is where a woman named Svetlana Moujsov enters the story. She's a peptide chemist at Rockefeller University who took Habner's genetic sequences and synthesized the actual peptides. More importantly, she figured out which exact version of GLP-1 was biologically active. You see, it wasn't the full sequence. It was actually a truncated form that was cleaved from the larger precursor protein in the gut. And then, in the 1990s, a researcher named Jens Juul Holst in Copenhagen showed that infusing GLP-1 in humans could control blood sugar and reduce appetite. But there was a massive problem. Natural GLP-1 has a half-life of about 2 minutes in the human body. An enzyme called DPP-4, remember that name because it's important, this enzyme DPP-4 chops it up almost instantly. So when you inject GLP-1 as a drug, it's being destroyed almost as soon as you give it. So at this point, it's just not usable as a drug. This is where our fourth character comes in, Lotte Knudsen, a pharmaceutical scientist at Novo Nordisk. Knudsen started working on GLP-1 as a young chemical engineering student, and it became her life's work. Knudsen's goal was to get a GLP-1 version that could be used as a drug, because right now it was just ineffective because it got broken down so fast. So they attempted to make sustained release formulations of native GLP-1. But every formulation they created a severe skin reaction. But they finally had a breakthrough. It came from an unexpected place. Gila monster venom. Gila monsters are one of only a few venomous lizards in the world. And in their saliva, they found a protein that had about 53% similarity to GLP-1, but was resistant to DPP-4, that enzyme that breaks down GLP-1. So that Gila monster protein became the first usable GLP-1 agonist drug. It was called exenatide, and it was approved in 2005. But Knudsen wanted something better still. Her idea was to attach a fatty acid chain to GLP-1 so it would bind to albumin in the bloodstream. Albumin is a blood protein, and it's like a taxi service for molecules in the blood. It keeps them circulating longer and protects them from degradation. After testing thousands of combinations, they finally created a drug called liraglutide. It was approved in 2010, and it had a half-life of 13 hours. It could be injected once a day and had significant effects on the human body. But Knudsen still wasn't satisfied. She wanted a drug that could be injected once weekly. So she did more testing, more modifications, found different fatty acid linkers, different amino acid sequences. And the result, after lots of deliberation and experimentation, was semaglutide. With a half-life of 7 days, it was approved in 2017 for diabetes and 2021 for weight loss. Meanwhile, while Knudsen was working on semaglutide at Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly was working on a different approach, a dual agonist that targets both GLP-1 and another hormone called GIP. The result was Tirzepatide, which shows even greater weight loss than semaglutide, up to 22% body weight in clinical trials. This was science at its best, a century-long mystery solved through collaboration of basic scientists, chemists, and pharmaceutical researchers. GLP-1 agonists went from a forgotten observation in 1906 to blockbuster drugs in the 2000s. All right, so that was the history, but let's get into the biology. How do these drugs actually work? GLP-1 is a peptide hormone that's released from your intestines after you eat. It travels through the bloodstream and binds to GLP-1 receptors in multiple tissues, including the pancreas, brain, stomach, and heart. In the pancreas, GLP-1 does something clever. It increases insulin secretion only when glucose levels are elevated. That GLP-1 dependent mechanism is why GLP-1 drugs don't typically cause dangerous hypoglycemia like some older diabetes drugs and insulin. It also suppresses glucagon, which normally raises blood sugar. In the brain, GLP-1 activates areas that control appetite and satiety, particularly in the hypothalamus and brainstem. This is where the magic happens for weight loss. You simply feel less hungry. Food doesn't have the same appeal. Portion sizes naturally shrink because you feel full faster. In the stomach, GLP-1 slows gastric emptying, which is the rate at which food moves from your stomach to your small intestines. This contributes to a feeling of fullness and also smooths out the post-meal glucose spikes. And in the cardiovascular system, GLP-1 appears to have protective effects, reducing inflammation and improving endothelial function. This is why several large trials have shown reduced cardiovascular events in people taking these drugs. Now, one of the biggest critiques I hear about GLP-1 drugs is that you have to keep increasing your dose forever. And if you ever stop, you just gain it all back. So let's talk about what the research actually says. This is a concept called tachyphylaxis, which basically means your body adapts to a drug over time and you need more of it to get the same effect. And yes, that does happen with GLP-1s, but only for certain effects and not for all of them. Studies show that the gastric emptying effect, the slowing down of your stomach, diminishes by 80% after just 4 days of continuous GLP-1 exposure. Your vagal nerve, which controls your stomach emptying, basically adapts and things start to normalize. But the effects on insulin secretion, blood sugar control, appetite suppression, and weight loss, those are all maintained. So you get what you call selective tolerance. The effect that causes nausea in the first place fades away as your stomach adapts, but the effects you actually want stick around. Now, what about needing higher and higher doses over time to achieve weight loss goals? Long-term studies show that most patients maintain their benefits for at least 2 to 4 years without needing dose increases. There's also registry data from over 90,000 semaglutide users showing that fewer than 15% needed a higher dose after the first year. So that forever escalating dose narrative may affect some people, but it's not the rule for everyone. Another common criticism is weight plateaus. You hit a weight and can't get below it even while on the drug. Now, those do happen, but it's usually not from the drug not working. What is more likely happening is that you've reached a new metabolic equilibrium. Your body needs fewer calories at your new lower weight. So further weight loss naturally requires more effort. And there's also something called lifestyle drift, where people start feeling so much better that they gradually relax the natural dietary habits that were working alongside the medication. Okay, so what are the actual results from these GLP-1 agonists? Because I think when you actually see what these drugs are doing, it puts things in a whole new perspective. For type 2 diabetes, the standard we use to measure blood sugar control is something called hemoglobin A1C. Here is a simple way to think about it. Your blood cells have a protein called hemoglobin, and over time, glucose in your blood sticks to it. Hemoglobin A1C measures what percentage of your hemoglobin has glucose attached to it. And because red blood cells live about 3 months, it gives us a snapshot of your average blood sugar over that whole period. A normal hemoglobin A1C is below 5.7%. Prediabetes starts at 5.7% and above, and a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes is made at 6.5%. Semaglutide brings hemoglobin A1C down by 1 to 2 percentage points. That's the difference between someone sitting at 8% and coming down to 6 or even 5.5%, potentially moving out of the diabetic range entirely. Tirzepatide does even better, bringing it down by 2 to 2.5 percentage points. And just for comparison, metformin, which has been the gold standard first-line diabetes drug for decades, reduces hemoglobin A1C by 1 to 1.5 points. So these newer medications are outperforming the old standard by a significant margin. Now for weight loss, and this is where it gets really interesting. Liraglutide gets you about 5 to 8% body weight loss. Semaglutide at the higher dose used for obesity, which is Wegovy, gets you 12 to 16%. And Tirzepatide at the highest dose, which is Zepbound, gets you 15 to 22% weight loss. Just to frame that, medical guidelines consider 5 to 10% weight loss to be clinically significant. These drugs are blowing past that threshold. And the clinical trials back this up in a big way. The STEP trials for semaglutide showed that participants lost an average of 33 pounds over 68 weeks. And about 70% of people lost at least 5% of their body weight, half of them at least 10%, and a third of them lost 15% or more. The SURMOUNT trial for Tirzepatide came along and raised the bar even higher. At the highest dose, people lost an average of 48 pounds over 72 weeks, with 91% hitting that 5% threshold and 57% losing 20% or more of their body weight. Being able to lose weight like that with a drug is pretty remarkable. But honestly, the most exciting data may not even be weight loss at all. It's the data from the heart. The SELECT trial, published in 2023, looked at semaglutide in people who had obesity and cardiovascular disease, but did not have diabetes. And it showed a 20% reduction in major cardiovascular events, meaning heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular disease. And the benefits keep expanding. We're seeing improvements in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're seeing meaningful improvement in obstructive sleep apnea symptoms. There's even data showing slowed progression of diabetic kidney disease. And there's emerging early-stage evidence pointing towards possible benefits in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. So when you look at all the data, GLP-1 agonist drugs, which started out as gut hormones that researchers hoped helped with blood sugar management, to drugs that act like pan-metabolic regulators, something that reaches into multiple organ systems and changes the trajectory of diseases in ways that we're still trying to fully understand. So based on that, you're probably pretty excited about GLP-1s, but let's have the reality check that I promised you at the beginning of the episode. Because no honest conversation about these drugs is complete without talking about what can go wrong. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast or it's helping you, please help me get it out to the rest of the world. All you need to do is rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. Share it with a friend, post it on Facebook, and that's basically it. The algorithm rewards engagement. Every review, every mention puts this show in front of someone who's looking for clear, no-nonsense health information, the type of information that I'm putting in these podcasts. So thanks so much, and let's get back to it. The most common side effects are gastrointestinal. And by most common, I mean really common. Nausea affects somewhere between 20 to 50% of users, especially during the dose escalation phase. Vomiting hits 5 to 20%. Diarrhea and constipation affect roughly 10 to 30% of people. The good news is that most of these are mild to moderate and tend to improve over the first few weeks as your body adapts. But for 5 to 10% of people, the GI side effects are bad enough that they stop the medication altogether. Gallbladder disease is another potential complication. Rapid weight loss combined with the fact that GLP-1s slow down bile movement creates conditions that favor gallstone formation. Clinical trials show roughly 1.5 to 2.5-fold increased risk of gallbladder problems, particularly at the higher doses and with prolonged use. Pancreatitis has been debated and early data raises concerns, but large randomized trials have not confirmed a direct link. The risk appears to be more connected with gallstones and rapid weight loss than to the drug itself. That said, if you have a history of pancreatitis, most doctors are going to steer you clear of these medications. Thyroid tumors are another potential concern because rodent studies show that GLP-1 drugs cause medullary thyroid cancer. But these studies are based on animal studies, which doesn't always correlate to human biology. Rodent thyroid cells are loaded with GLP-1 receptors, and human thyroid cells have very few. And in nearly 20 years of these drugs being on the market, large trials have not shown an increased risk in humans. There is still, though, a black box warning, and these drugs are contraindicated if you have a personal history or family history of medullary thyroid cancer or a condition called multiple endocrine neoplasias type 2. Now, here's the side effect that I think deserves a lot more attention than it gets, and that's muscle loss. When you lose weight on GLP-1s, you're not just losing fat, you're also losing muscle. With Semaglutide, 25 to 40% of total weight loss is lean mass. With Tirzepatide, it's about 25%. With liraglutide, some studies put it as high as 60%. So if you lose 40 pounds on semaglutide, somewhere between 10 and 16 of those pounds could be muscle. Now, to be fair, any weight loss method causes some muscle loss. Calorie restriction alone typically results in 25% lean mass loss. So GLP-1s are not uniquely terrible here, but there's an important difference. With resistance training and lifestyle-based weight loss, you actually build muscle while losing fat, especially if you're newer to training. With GLP-1s, the weight loss often happens so fast that preserving muscle is much harder, even if you're doing everything right. For a healthy 35-year-old with plenty of muscle reserves, trading some lean mass for dramatically improved metabolic health is probably a reasonable trade-off. For a 75-year-old who's already borderline sarcopenic, which is a condition where you have very low muscle mass in elderly and actually affects your longevity, that same muscle loss could tip them into frailty, increasing fall risk, fractures, and real risks of disability. This is not a hypothetical concern. Half of adults over 80 already have sarcopenia, and natural aging is already eating away at muscle mass year over year. So if you add medication-induced muscle loss on top of that, you could put someone in real trouble. And honestly, I've seen this a few times already in elderly patients on GLP-1 agonists, and it can be devastating. And then there's one last thing. You've probably heard the term Ozempic face, and it's a real phenomena, although it's not specific to Ozempic. When you're on a GLP-1 drug, the rapid weight loss can cause fat and volume loss in the face that makes features look gaunt and hollow. And it's more pronounced in older patients with less skin elasticity. And once you've lost that facial fat, it can be very hard to gain back, and for many people, can feel disfiguring. Okay, so now that you know how these drugs work and what they do, let's talk about the landscape of available drugs, because they're not all the same, and it helps to know what we are actually talking about with each of these different formulations. The oldest of the long-acting GLP-1s is liraglutide, sold as Victoza for diabetes and Saxenda for weight loss. It's a daily injection, and it's been around since 2010, and it can deliver modest results at around 5 to 8% body weight loss. It's also going off patent soon, which means generics are coming and the cost is going to drop significantly. Then there's semaglutide, which most people know as Ozempic or Wegovy. This is a once-weekly injection, and it's considerably more effective, delivering 12 to 16% weight loss. There's also an oral version called Rybelsus, which is a daily pill. The oral form uses a special absorption enhancer to get the drug through your gut lining, but it's less potent than the injection. Tirzepatide, sold as Mounjaro for diabetes and Zepbound for weight loss, is the newest and currently the most powerful option. It's a weekly injection, and it's unique because it targets two receptors like we talked about before, GLP-1 and GIP, rather than just the GLP-1 receptor like the other drugs. That dual action appears to be why it outperforms the others with weight loss in the range of 15 to 22%. It also has been approved for obstructive sleep apnea, which is very interesting in itself. Now, what else is coming down the pipeline? Well, the one that's generating the most buzz is retatrutide, which is a triple agonist from Eli Lilly that targets GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon all at once. Phase 2 trial data showed around 24% weight loss, which would be the highest we've seen yet. There are also higher dose oral formulations in development for weight loss and once monthly injectable versions on the horizon. So, with all those options, which one's the best? Well, it really depends on the person. For pure weight loss, Tirzepatide currently wins. For cardiovascular and kidney protection, Semaglutide has the deepest and most robust long-term trial data. And for people who cannot tolerate injections, oral Semaglutide is a good option, though you're going to trade some efficacy for convenience. Now, I want to take a step back because I know I just made GLP-1s sound amazing. And they are very interesting and can be quite impactful for people who are in a deep metabolic hole. But you'll be surprised to know that I'm not pro GLP-1. For certain situations, they may be a godsend. But for most people, honestly, there are diet and lifestyle changes you can make that come remarkably close in terms of results, cost next to nothing, carry none of the side effects, and actually deliver benefits to your overall health that no drug on the planet can fully replicate. Hey everybody, I want you to imagine something. Someone somewhere discovered that cutting out a certain food lowered their blood pressure, or a simple daily practice eliminated their headaches, or drinking coffee 2 hours later helped them sleep through the night. These discoveries exist, but that knowledge is like a grain of sand on a beach halfway around the world for the rest of us. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve with an app I'm building called sharemytrial.com. This is a platform where people share health solutions that worked for them, and then the community validates what works on a broader scale. Right now, I'm looking for beta testers, so if you're interested, go to sharemytrial.com and sign up. Help me turn that grain of sand into a pearl in your palm. So what are these secrets to amazing health that I'm talking about? Well, they're not secret, they're not magic, and we've all heard of them. So, one of the greatest diet changes you can make is the Mediterranean diet. We're talking about fruits, vegetables, whole grains, olive oil, fish, and healthy meats. It's not a fad diet. This has been studied for decades. It reduces cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and all-cause mortality, and it produces around 5 to 10% body weight loss over a year. Not only that, it's one of the easiest dietary patterns to actually stick to long-term, and it's not restrictive, it's not miserable, and the food is genuinely good. And then you add resistance training to that. I'm talking 3 to 4 sessions per week because resistance training does something that almost nothing else can match. It builds muscle mass. It increases bone density. It improves insulin sensitivity. It boosts your resting metabolic rate. And it dramatically reduces fall risk in older adults, which is one of the leading causes of serious injury and death in people over 65. Muscle is not just cosmetic, it's metabolically active tissue that burns calories around the clock and improves how your body handles glucose. And then on top of that, you add gentle aerobic exercise. Just 150 minutes per week of walking or whatever type of movement you prefer can dramatically improve your metabolic health. So when you combine Mediterranean eating with consistent resistance training and aerobic exercise, here's what you get. 5 to 10% body weight loss, maintained or even increased muscle mass, better cardiovascular fitness, stronger bones, reduced inflammation, improved mental health. And here's the part that pharmaceutical companies cannot offer you. 0 medication side effects, 0 ongoing costs, and results that are genuinely sustainable if you keep the habits going. So, why isn't everyone just doing this instead of reaching for a GLP-1? Well, because it's hard. People don't like to make changes to their lives. And honestly, behavioral change is one of the hardest things in medicine. Our food environment is actively working against us. Ultra-processed, calorie-dense food is cheap, convenient, engineered to be addictive. Our unending busy days discourage active movement. Our work culture keeps us sedentary and stressed. And our brains are literally wired to seek out high-calorie foods and conserve energy. This is just how our biology works. And this is where GLP-1s do something genuinely remarkable. They quiet that desire for bad behavior at a neurological level. That constant mental battle with food cravings, which makes healthy eating feel like an impossibility, completely diminishes. That is real and that is powerful, and that is why people stay on these medications. But here's what I really want you to take away from this. GLP-1s are not a replacement for lifestyle change. They are a tool that makes lifestyle change more achievable. But if you get on a GLP-1 and you're just eating less ultra-processed food, but you never change what you're eating or start moving your body, you're leaving most of the benefit on the table. Yes, you will lose weight, but you won't build muscle that you need for healthy aging. You won't get the cardiovascular benefits that come from exercise. And if your diet is still nutritionally empty, your body is still being starved of what it actually needs, but now just in smaller portions. And here's the practical reality. Most people do eventually come off these GLP-1 drugs, whether because of cost, side effects, or simply reaching their goal weight. And when that happens, the weight tends to come back unless you have built real, sustainable habits underneath the medication dosing. So, that being said, what does the best approach actually look like to these drugs? Well, if you're considering a GLP-1, use the medication as a bridge. Start the GLP-1, and as your appetite drops and the weight starts coming off, use that window intentionally. Work with a dietitian or on your own to build an eating pattern you can actually sustain. Start resistance training with a focus on progressive overload. Get your daily movement in, whether it's walking, taking stairs, or picking up an active hobby, and address your sleep and your stress, because both of these have massive impacts on your metabolic health. Then, once you've lost a meaningful amount of weight, built some muscle, and established solid habits, consider working with your doctor to taper the medication while leaning harder into the lifestyle support. Will you regain some weight? Well, maybe a little, but if you have built muscle and changed your relationship with food, you're in an entirely different position than if you had relied on the drug all by itself. These GLP-1 drugs can open a door of opportunity for real, sustainable lifestyle changes. But you still have to be the one who walks through that door. So, that being said, I think select groups of people should consider taking a GLP-1. Let's talk about who those people are. The strongest candidates are people with type 2 diabetes and obesity, particularly if they already have cardiovascular disease or chronic kidney disease. The risk reduction data is clearest for these groups. Other strong candidates are people with BMIs of 30 or higher who have genuinely tried lifestyle changes for at least 6 to 12 months and have not had success. And people who are not yet diabetic but are metabolically headed in the wrong direction. Think insulin resistance, fatty liver, high blood pressure, abnormal lipids. Significant weight loss in these groups can actually reverse that trajectory before it becomes full-blown disease. Now, I also think there's people who should proceed with great caution when considering these GLP-1 drugs. Older adults over 65 with limited muscle mass should be very cautious. The risk-benefit calculation shifts when muscle loss could tip a person into frailty. And if this is you or someone you love, and you're taking a GLP-1 or considering taking one, then your approach should include high protein intake, consistent resistance training, and probably a very slow dose escalation. And then another group of people who should be very cautious when considering taking a GLP-1 agonist are patients under 25 years old without severe obesity. The brain is still developing, long-term safety data in this group is limited, and the habits built in youth matter more than short-term weight loss numbers. And then there's also hard contraindications, which means people who should absolutely not take GLP-1s. And these are people with a family history or a personal history of medullary thyroid cancer or a condition called MEN2, active or severe gallbladder disease, severe gastroparesis, pregnancy or breastfeeding, and a history of pancreatitis is at least a relative contraindication, which is worth discussing with your doctor. So, if you're going to use one of these medications, here's how I would approach it. Start low and go slow. Most of the nausea and vomiting people experience happens when the dose gets pushed up too fast. Take the full recommended time at each step. And if you're still having GI issues, stay where you are or even drop back down a dose. There's no prize for hitting the maximum dose if you feel awful. Protein is non-negotiable. Aim for 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body weight. When you're losing weight rapidly, you're in a catabolic state, meaning your body will cannibalize muscle for energy if you don't give it enough protein to work with. Resistance training is also non-negotiable. 3 to 4 full body sessions per week with progressive overload and compound movements. Think of it as your muscle insurance policy while the weight is coming off, and it's likely going to be coming off rapidly. And then for everyone else, or anyone who's reluctant to take a GLP-1 drug, the Mediterranean diet, aerobic exercise, and resistance training will transform your life and your body. You just have to do it. Nature has built the mechanism into our bodies through millennia of evolution so that you can be your best self with food, movement, fresh air, sleep, and sunshine. And one last thing before we finish up, I've been seeing a lot of talk about microdosing GLP-1s. My initial instinct was skeptical on this one because the big Semaglutide trials showed a clear pattern. Higher doses produced more weight loss. So what could a tiny dose actually do? Well, the answer is more nuanced than a flat answer of nothing. The GLP-1 receptor is a highly sensitive receptor by design, and your body already releases GLP-1 naturally after meals in very small amounts that have real biological effects. So a low pharmacological dose doing something in your body is not biologically unreasonable. Do we have rigorous trials proving this? No, we don't. But the biology behind how native GLP-1 works in our body gives microdosing GLP-1s a reasonable theoretical basis. Okay, so that's the pod, folks. I hope this episode has given you a much clearer picture of what GLP-1 drugs actually are, how they work, and what the evidence really says. These drugs are genuinely fascinating developments in pharmacology and human biology. And for the right person in the right situation, they can be life-changing tools. But I want to leave you with this one more time. You don't need a prescription to start moving in the right direction. Diet and lifestyle are always available to you. They cost little to nothing, they come with no side effects, and the benefits go far beyond what any medication can offer on its own. The best drug in the world is no substitute for taking care of your body. So whatever you're considering, one of these medications or not, fundamentals still matter. Eat well, move your body, build some muscle, get some sleep, and get some sunshine. That is the foundation everything else gets built on. So if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who's thinking about or curious about these GLP-1 drugs. Leave a review if you're listening on a podcast app. And if you have questions or topics you want me to cover, reach out on social media or through my website. And until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay healthy. Cheers.